So our next speaker is going to talk about running and maybe persuade us to join him on one. The speech title is Why I Run. The manual and project number are Manual 10 and Inspire Your Audience is the project. The purpose to be achieved is to inspire our fellow Toastmasters to become more physically active. The time allotment for this speech is 8 to 10 minutes. A word about our speaker. Speaker is a chemical engineer and an MBA. He is a senior business development manager with Linde Engineering. He's married with a 28-year-old bioengineer daughter who lives and works in DC. His primary recreational hobby and passion is running. Since age 40, he has put Forrest Gump to shame, running a total of 13,700 miles, which is more than halfway around the world. So we don't know what the circumference of the world is. Since his first marathon 14 years ago, he has run 25 more and is currently training for 2 more. He self-publishes a running-focused blog at runinamerica.com. Please help me to welcome Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and guests. As you were hearing the introduction, 13,700 miles since age 40, 26 marathons, 2 more planned. What word is going on in your brain? Probably crazy? What the heck? Well, just to illustrate that 13,700, if this is Houston, and this is Los Angeles, and now New York, back to Houston, do that again, and then go back to Los Angeles, that's about 13,700 miles. That's what I've done since age 40. Now, you may be asking the question, well, what happened before age 40 if you've done all that since? Well, let's imagine that we all get into Michael J. Fox's DeLorean, and we go back in time to May of 1999, because a very, very important thing was happening in my life at that time. You see, in May of 1999, if you were looking at me, of course, I'd be a tiny bit younger. I'd also be significantly heavier. I was more than 50 pounds heavier than I am today at that time. It took several things coming together at the same time, all of which fundamentally affected, for the positive, the trajectory of my subsequent life. These 4 things I wanted to share with you very quickly. Number 1, embarrassment and shame. I went to the department store. As a typical man, I gained my weight around my waist, which means, therefore, 2-inch larger circumference pants about every 3 to 6 months. So I went to the department store. I need 2-inch larger. Sorry, sir, we don't sell that size. You'll have to go to a big and tall men's store. Oh, man. Imagine replacing my entire wardrobe just because I got fat. Now, was that enough to change my life? No. Next thing that happened, I went to meet a good friend. And this good friend I hadn't seen in 6 months. And I hardly recognized my good friend. He had lost 60 pounds in the 6 months since I'd last seen him. And I asked, how did you do it? And he said, the push-away diet. I said, what? Push-away? I've never heard of that diet. Mark, push away, which means instead of eating my food, I only eat about half or less, and I push it away. I said, but don't you get hungry? He says, that's why I carry carrots and celery, and I drink a lot of water, and I'm fine. In fact, when the food comes, I immediately take half, put it in a to-go, and then I eat the remaining half, and I'm fine. And I've lost 60 pounds in 6 months. That was the conversation that fundamentally affected my weight loss, because in the next 5 months, so now by December 1999, I was at my current weight, a tiny bit less, but more or less where I am now, when a second friend had an even more impactful effect on my life. You see, the second friend, congratulating me, brought me to Starbucks. And you know how guys are in terms of spending money on a guy friend. They don't do it. So for this guy friend to buy me a Starbucks coffee, I had to be a special friend to him. And indeed I was, because he gave me very appreciated advice and congratulations. He said, Mark, congratulations on losing 50 pounds in 5 months. But then he said this, it's a shame you're going to gain it all back again. And I at first felt insulted. I said, why do you say that? He says, because, sorry, 90%. Now, as an engineer, when I hear statistics, my ears open up. I listen. 90% of Americans that lose as much weight as you just did gain it all back within 12 months. And the only way you won't, Mark, is by fundamentally changing your lifestyle. Mark, you don't exercise. You've never exercised. He was wrong. In high school, I was on the swimming team. But fundamentally, he was right. I was completely sedentary. Mark, you don't exercise. You need to change your lifestyle. Why don't you run with me tomorrow morning? That's how I began running. That next morning, I joined my good friend who gave his much appreciated comment, and I started running. Now, to be honest with you, even though I'd lost all this weight, I was completely out of shape. I couldn't even run a mile. That's how out of shape I was. In fact, just after 200 yards, my heart rate monitor was beeping. I thought it must be defective. It wasn't defective. My heart was pounding through my chest. That's how out of shape I was. But I kept going. Day by day, I was able to run a little bit further. My heart had calmed down. In other words, I was becoming physically fit. But I was not a marathon runner. I never would have dreamed of being a marathon runner. So what changed that? Well, about 3 years of this 6 to 9 miles per week. At the shoe store, they had a 5K race. And I said, I've never done a 5K race. I didn't need 3.1 miles, yeah. I could do 3.1 miles. So I start the 3.1 mile race. My wife and then 13-year-old daughter were waiting for me at the finish line. So I made every mistake you could make, typical of which is to start out way too fast. Your adrenaline and excitement gets the better of you and zoom, you take off. And then after 1 mile, I was walking embarrassedly as people were passing me by. And then about a half mile before the finish line, I see the finish line and I get all excited because my wife and daughter are waiting for me. And I sprint, passing by everybody. And even though I made so many mistakes in that initial race, I felt invigorated and excited from the experience of signing up for a 5K and completing my first 5K. So of course, I signed up for a 10K. And I did that, made so many mistakes, just like I did the prior time. And by the way, the Run in America blog that was mentioned, that's primarily for myself. Every time I make a mistake, at least I document it, because that helps me the next time remember what my many mistakes are. So then after doing a 10K, I said, oh, I'm a runner now. I'm gonna skip that half marathon, big mistake. I'm gonna skip that half marathon, go straight to a marathon. And I said, to prepare, I'm gonna go to the bookstore. And I bought a bookstore, at the bookstore I bought a book on how to train for a marathon. And of course I'm so smart, I don't need to read this book. I just read the chapters that are interesting. So I read about 2 out of the 16 chapters. And I completely neglected the most important chapter, which talks about 6-month mandatory period to train for a marathon with gradually increasing mileage, ideally with a group. Did I have a group? No. Did I follow 6 months? No. Therefore, what happened on the day of the marathon? Of course, you can predict what happened. By mile 17, I was walking. I was convinced by now I had walked mile 25, and I was convinced I could not run another step. I had walked so far and run as far as I could when there was the splitting image of my father at mile 25 looking at me, and he saw my name, Mark, and he shouted at me exactly as my father would have. Run, Mark, run! And when he said that, I don't know where the energy came from. I sprinted the remaining 1.2 miles to complete the marathon. And that convinced me that a marathon is much more than physical endurance. Because honestly, if you had asked me at mile 25, is it possible for you to run even 3 steps? I would be convinced the answer is no. But clearly there's an untapped source of energy that I was able to harness. Now, despite that massive mistake of walking so many miles, I was fortunate to find a wonderful group called the Kenyon Way Training Group. This is a group of about 250 Houston runners. I joined them, and it suddenly transformed the training experience. The 6-month time period that I had referred to, now it became natural because I was joining my friends. And guess what? When you're training for a marathon or running a marathon, you want to be aerobic versus anaerobic. What's the best way of proving you're aerobic? You're able to talk. So if you're running with a group and you're talking, now of course we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so ideally we're doing more listening than talking, but generally, you know me, I tend to talk too much. But anyway, so I do talk and I do listen, and I'm making friends and I'm expanding my social circle. But most importantly, I'm learning from these individuals who know so much more than me. Most of them had run 10 marathons. And for me, after just running one, meeting people who'd run 10 marathons, that was mind-blowing. And I got hooked. And then after 5 marathons, I heard about Boston. Boston, you have to qualify for. And at my age, I had to run a 3-hour, 30-minute marathon. So that became my new objective. I've got to beat 3:30. So I achieved 3:30. In fact, I did a 3:19 in Boston. That was my best ever. And fortunately, it wasn't the Boston that you're all thinking of with that horrible terrorist event. But long story, I just explained my lengthy running history. I want to get to why. What are the benefits? In fact, there's a synthesis of health, psychological, and social benefits. I've already alluded to the social benefits, the expansion of the friendship network. There are also significant health benefits. Our mortality, the length of years of our life, has been directly correlated with our cardiovascular capacity. So by becoming a runner, you are literally extending your life. People that say you're wasting all that time, Mark, to run 16,500 miles, you wasted all those hours. I said, excuse me? I've added years to my life and life to my remaining years. Thank you very much, Mr. Toastmaster.